Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we have the immense zechus to be joined by Rabbi Michoel Zylberman Shlita, who is the Sgan Menahel and the Associate Director of the Beth Din of America. We will be talking about a topic that certainly falls under that purview. He's a Yadin Yadin musmach of Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, aka the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, depending on your girsa. He was a member of the Bell and Harry Wexner Kol Elyon and holds an MA from the Bernard Revel Graduate School in Medieval Jewish History. In addition to his work at the Beth Din of America as an administrator, Mesader Gittin and Dayan, Rav Zylberman serves as the REIT's faculty as a Rosh Chabura and functions as the director of Gerut for the Rabbinical Council of America. He is the author of Tov Lev on Masechet Pesachim with an appended Kuntreis Da'at Yehudit on the laws of Gittin and Gerut. And I think I've seen the word Gerus come up a few times already, and that's certainly no coincidence because we will be talking about something related to the general topic of Gerus and conversion. But what's really interesting is that we're going to be looking at a tshuva from HaRav Nota Greenblatt Zatzal, and that's not usually the jump-off point when you're asked on like a Shavuos night to talk about Rus and Gerus. That's usually not the first source in the packet. So I'm really fascinated by this, and maybe before we jump into the particulars of the tshuva, what's the shiloh we're looking at? Tell us a little bit about Rav Nota for those of us who aren't so familiar, and what are we looking at here today?
Thank you, Rabbi Kurtz. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to share some Torah thoughts with your listeners. The background of this tshuva/letter is as follows. About 18 years ago, together with my friend Rabbi Ari Zatz, we were looking through the YU Archives collection, looking for material to print in a volume that was being published in honor of then Menahel of Yeshiva, Rabbi Zylberman, who passed away a couple of years ago, legendary Menahel of our yeshiva. And we were looking through the collected writings and correspondences of Rav David Lifshitz, the Suval Karav, one of the prominent post-war Rashi Yeshiva in Yeshiva. And I stumbled across a letter that Rav Nota Greenblatt had written to him in the early 1960s about a particular Geirus situation that Rav Nota was dealing with in Memphis. And I thought it was interesting. I made a copy of it, I put it away, and I more or less forgot about it until Rav Nota passed away a few years ago. And I remember that shuv, I pulled it out, I found it, and decided to publish it in a commemorative volume of the Kol Tzvi, which is the Torah journal that is published annually from the Bell and Harry Wexner Kol Elyon at Yeshiva, of which Rav Mordechai Willis Shlita, our Av Beth Din, is the Rosh Kolel. And we published a commemorative volume of that journal in honor of Rabbi Willig's 50 years teaching in Yeshiva. We called it Kuntreis Da'at Yehudit and included various letters and shuvas that were previously unpublished on Beth Din topics, including from our founding Av Beth Din, the brother of Rav Moshe Steinberg, who was the Av Beth Din of America from the 60s to his passing in the late 80s. And we included this shuva, this letter to Rav David, written by Rav Nota. Rav Nota Greenblatt, whose personality was marvelously captured in Shmuel Batnick's Art School biography, which everybody who's told me who's read it has been immensely appreciative to his work, and it's a fascinating and wonderful read.
You already know that he's a unique figure because I can't think of many art scroll biographies that the rabbi has a goatee. I mean, I'm partial to this, has a goatee on the front cover. So there's already something unique. I was actually impressed that. I mean, not that he's not deserving of the art school biography, but he kind of bucks the usual aesthetic. So I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that they put that out.
Rav Nota was someone who was Merutza Lakal that everyone loved and crossed all party lines. Uh, in the Beth Din world, Rav Nota was most famous as being someone that would travel the length and breadth of the United States to arrange for Gittin in communities where there's no standing Beth Din, which he did for decades into his 90s, with no fanfare, no heirs, just on his own, one person traveling wherever needed. Whenever he needed to be somewhere, he was there, quicker than you could imagine.
If I may, just a little bit of biographical information. I mean, that's what I've heard about Rav Nota, that he was everywhere. If there was Gittin or Gerut, whatever, he was the one who would leave the New York area, and he lived in Memphis, I believe. I see the tshuva at least is coming from Memphis. So I mean, one is that he was willing to live quote out of town, but what was his background? Like, where did he come from? Where did he learn? How did he wind up being such a huge Talmid Chacham, but not where the rest of the yeshiva world was?
Uh, if, Anyone who hasn't read the biography can read the biography. Rav Nota was born in the 1920s. His father was a Rav. He actually spent some years in Eretz Yisrael in his youth, and the family came back to America. He had fascinating stories that aren't in the biography about his stay in Eretz Yisrael. But he's very close to Rav Moshe. He actually spent a year plus learning with the Rav in Boston circa 1940, where before the Rav came to Yeshiva, the Rav's father, Moshe, passed away in 1941. And then the Rav came to Yeshiva to take over that year. But before that, very briefly, he had a kibbutz of Talmidim learning with him in Boston. So Rav Nata was from that unique small group of Talmidim that learned with the Rav. But he ended up coming to Memphis in 1949, and he stayed there the entirety of his career. He built a day school, he built a community, he was the halachic authority, and he was the person of note in Memphis, but he ended up servicing the entire world almost by accident. The story that he told, which is also not in the biography, how did he come to be Masechet Gittin? Early on in his years in Memphis, someone walked into his house and said, Rabbi, you need a get. So Rav Nata said, okay, we don't have any for any Masechet Gittin locally. I'll have to bring someone in from Dallas to come and do a get. He said, Rabbi, no, if we don't do a get now, the get's not happening. So Rav Nata had no choice. He had never done a get before, but he saw Gittin by his father. He saw Gittin by Moshe. He was able to figure out what to do. And as they say, the rest is history.
Oh wow. So like he didn't even plan. He was just planning on being kind of a community builder, a pulpit rabbi. But I guess that's what happens when you don't have the infrastructure and you don't have a VOD with 50 million rabbis regulating the kashrus, the eruv, the mikvah. You have to figure it out yourself. That's remarkable. So the tshuva we're looking at, I mean, this is all, I know this is like a little bit meta. I know we want to get to the meat and potatoes momentarily, but it's interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a published volume of his chuvos, or kind of like what you had to do was by happenstance find it somewhere, document it, and put it into a memorial volume, so that way people like me could read it later on?
Rav Nata published a beautiful sefer on Chumash that was published initially decades ago and then republished relatively recently. Aside from that, I don't believe he published any other svarim. There were letters and chuvas here and there. In the last years of his life, for a couple of years, when he was around 90, he started a yeshiva in Memphis, which he was very excited about. To the extent that he was able to scale back his other involvements, he did so in order to start this yeshiva. And one of his star talmidim from that time, the couple of years he had a yeshiva in Memphis, reached out to me after Rav Nata passed away. He was planning on putting together a project of collecting Rav Nata's ksavim. I don't know what happened to that. I haven't seen anything yet, but I don't know if that is in the works still or not.
So this is a huge mitzvah, and I tell our listeners, if you'd like a PDF of the document, it is on YU Torah, but I also downloaded just the particular pages we're looking at, so you can email me or go on YU Torah. It's uploaded there as well. And so, okay, clearly we are talking about someone who is a huge Talmid Chacham and very unique and has a very unique set of experiences. And I wonder if we will see some of that in the tshuva. So maybe you want to tell us the scenario. He's writing to Rav David Lifshitz. What's the issue that they are addressing? It sounds like it picks up in the middle of something.
So this is Dateline 1962 Memphis. Rav Nata is in his mid-30s. He arrived there, as we said, in 1949. So he's been there a little over a decade. He already started the local day school basically from scratch. And apparently someone from Memphis had complained to Rav David Lifshitz, who was about 20 years Rav Nata senior, about a certain Gerut situation that Rav Nata was involved in, where the way it was presented, Rav Nata converted a child without converting his mother, within a vacuum sounds scandalous or violation of normal Beth Din protocol. So Rav Nota wrote to Rav David to defend his position, to set the record straight, to explain that Rav David had been given a false set of facts. Rav Nota begins the letter saying that Achronim were always very careful when you have tshuva literature to make sure that the language, the nusach of the question is properly documented in the tshuva because so much hinges on the details, and you weren't given the right details. So I want to set the record straight to defend my reputation, and so you should understand what actually happened here.
And we should note to give a shout out. I mean, this is the pre-GPS era, I presume. This was when there was a little bit more of a Wild West. Nowadays, Baruch Hashem, I think with your work and others who are working both at the Beth Din of America and working with the Geiros Beth Din, there's a little bit more of a standardized way of going about it. But this was a little bit more of the Wild West, I presume, back then.
This is 45 years before GPS.
Exactly. Just want to emphasize that.
Right. This is much of Geiros was the Wild West in America for decades. But right. So the basic story here was as follows. There was a family that applied to send their 5-year-old son to the local day school in Memphis. And as part of the application process, the principal discovered that the mother and the child had both converted with the local conservative rabbi. Now, Rav Nota says you can't really blame them for going to the local conservative rabbi to convert because the local conservative rabbi was the Talmud of Reb Elchanan who learned in Baranovich before the war, which I had heard Rav Nota mention that to me in another context at one point also. So he said he looked like a proper pedigree for a rabbi, but he was a conservative rabbi, and the Orthodox community was not prepared to accept a conservative Geiros. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to apply to the Orthodox day school. Basically, this family was living an Orthodox lifestyle at that time. And the easy fix would have been to convert the mother, convert the son Orthodox, and everyone would live happily ever after. In this letter to Rav David, Rav Nota addresses 3 points that were relevant to this scenario. Number 1, why he felt he could not be Megayer the mother. Number 2, why he felt that he could be Megayer the son without the mother. And then he has another chiddush about the parameters of ger katan.
Great. So, break it down for us.
So as far as the first question, Rav Nota notes that the motivation of this woman, the mother, to convert initially, before however many years earlier this was for the sake of marriage. She was interested in marrying someone who was born Jewish. And the Gemara tells us in Yevamos and Daf Kaf Daled that we're not supposed to be Makabel Gerim who convert for ulterior motivation, and most prominently not to be Makabel Ger that converts to Shem Ishus for the sake of marriage. Meaning, even if the person is going to be totally committed to living an observant lifestyle and 100% Orthodox in practice and belief, nevertheless, there's a impediment to Lichachila converting someone who is coming for ulterior motivation.
Right, and so that's the key word there, lichatchila. We're talking about post facto here, or possibly. I mean, the conservative element is also a bit of a monkey wrench.
Right. So the Gemara does say that we paskin b'di'evet kulam gerim. If you did post facto convert someone l'shem ishus, the Geiros is a good Geiros as long as all the proper procedures are followed. You did whatever the ingredients of a kosher Geiros are, including a proper kabbalas and mitzvahs that the person is committing to and observant of a proper halachic lifestyle. The Gemara doesn't explicitly explain why you can't be Megayer Sabbath L'Shem Ishus, but the implication of the Rishonim there is that we're concerned that even though ostensibly they are going to be observant, maybe that's not the case, maybe they won't be properly Mekabel mitzvos, etc. But the basic halachic issue that's relevant to this case and to hundreds of cases that come up all the time, about a third of the Geiros situations and files that we have are typically where there's a L'Shem Ishus factor involved. The question is, how do you assess a Geiros where there are multiple motivations? On the one hand, the initial impetus is for the sake of marriage, but the Beth Din is able to discern, independent of that there's sincere motivation and commitment. So is that really called, at the end of the day, a Geiros L'Shem Ishus? Right. That's a topic that post can struggle with.
So yeah, I'm curious in your experience. I mean, I don't expect there to be actual hard data on this, but anecdotally, how frequently do you have someone come over and say, philosophically, I went through and I looked at this religion, that philosophy, and logic kind of just led me to Judaism, and I want to convert. Do you ever have someone who comes over to you with that pitch, or is it more often for relationship purposes or other purposes?
So the demographics usually break down into thirds. 1/3 where there's a ulterior motivation of L'Shem Ishus. 1/3 where the candidate has some kind of Jewish identity, either a previous non-halachic conversion that they went through or a parent went through, or a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, but people that identify previously as Jewish, even if they're not halachically Jewish. And the last third are people that come what we'll call more lishma. Now, lishma could be, as you said, they explored all religions and they came to the theological conclusion that this is the truth. It could be people that are enamored with the frum lifestyle because they have frum colleagues and coworkers and other students in university, and they see what a frum lifestyle look like. And they're interested in that initially because of kind of the outward social trappings before the philosophy and theology.
Interesting. And there's, of course, the parallel discussion about the kiruv industry. That usually, I think the way most people who work in kiruv, they probably aren't standing up there and giving, going through the kuzari and going through all these proofs. That might be part of it, but I always hear you just invite the person over for Friday night and they'll get to experience the cholent and et cetera, et cetera. Well, maybe during the day, and the experience, and that's what brings people in. But okay, that's interesting. So this is l'shem ishus. This is not out of the ordinary.
Right. So just in terms of the halachic background there, in Tshuva literature, there is a orientation that some have. The famous Tshuva of Reb Chaim Ozer and Achiezer, Chelek Gimel, Siman Kavav, that has this kind of approach. But already you see language in the Beis Yosef, in Siman Beis Samches, that indicates this, that Hakol Lefi Re'os Einei HaBeis Din, is the Tshuva in the Sridei Eish, that if a Beis Din is able to ascertain that there is independently sincere motivation, l'shem shemayim, even if the initial impetus was l'shem gerus, and maybe that's not called a real l'shem gerus at the end of the day, just like the Gemara indicates that Hillel was Megayer, the person who had certain conditions, the various Hillel stories in Shabbos, Gemara and Shabbos, and the Farshim there discussed that even though there seemed to be some other ulterior motivation, but ultimately Hillel was able to discern the sufficient and requisite sincerity in order to continue with the gerus.
It's a good point, because oftentimes it's not either or. It's not either it's lishma or shelo lishma. It could be a mix. I mean, I could eat breakfast and maybe I'm primarily doing it because I'm hungry, but maybe a little part of me wants to do it so I have energy to learn Torah. And both could happen at the same time. They're not inherently contradictory.
Right. But so that's the issue that the poskim struggle with. Rav Nota himself, he writes in this letter that in the 12 years that he's been in Memphis so far, 1962, he never did a gerus l'shem ishus. And I can tell you that talking to Rav Nota in his later years, in the 60 years that he was in Memphis, he never did a gerus l'shem ishus. I remember rabbis would call me from Memphis sometimes that they needed a gerus to be done. I said, you have Rav Nota there. They said, Rav Nota won't touch it if it's l'shem ishus. So Rav Nota assumes over here that even though we're talking about a case where there was already conservative conversion before, we're just talking about an upgrade. And we're talking about a case where they're already married, they're already living together, and some poskim say in that case that's not called l'shem ishus because they're already married. So it's not like they need to convert in order to get married. They're already married. They're already living together as husband and wife. Despite all that, Rav Nota felt that this was a l'shem ishus situation that he wasn't prepared to touch. Then, that being the case, step 2 is, well, if I can't do anything for the mother, can I do something for the kid?
Right. There was one element in the tshuva. This was on the second page that just grabbed my attention. Maybe you could speak to this. This is Os Beis. He says that there's a raya shemuchanim l'shaim schar limud gavoa liyeshiva amanashi kablu sheyilmod sham. If I'm understanding correctly, like it was the fact that they're willing to dish out yeshiva day school tuition is a clear indication of sincerity. That as someone who has to pay tuition for kids at this stage in life, that was that I would have to agree that's a true testament of sacrifice for living a Jewish life.
How much tuition was for the day school in Memphis in 1962? But probably much less than we're paying.
Well, you have to adjust for inflation, but probably true also anyway. Yes, they probably didn't have all the guidance counselor for Israel and then this resource and that sports team. Yeah, that's probably true. But what I think is interesting also, you pointed out that Rav Nota would never convert l'shem ishus. It's funny because usually I'll just speak for myself, but I feel like there's this stereotype that, oh, the out of town Rabbanim, because of having less infrastructure and having a more diverse constituency, they'll have to be more makel than the Rabbanim who are, on the Lower East Side or who are within the New York Jewish community. But what's interesting is you're saying, and I think this is what made Rav Nota perhaps unique, was that just because he may have been, I don't want to say middle of nowhere, there were Jews there, but he seemed to have been able to maintain his principles nonetheless.
For sure. And as we'll see, despite being a negative on issue one, he's a positive on issue two in order to try to help as much as he can within his own halachic parameters.
Right. So I'll stop talking for a few minutes. And so why don't you, finish? Let's finish the breakdown of the tshuva.
Okay, so then the second topic that he addresses, now that he established that he can't convert the mother, are there grounds to convert the son without the mother to do a proper halachic gerus? Now, the premise of Giyur Katan, of converting a minor, the Gemara in Subas and Daf Yud Aleph, is the notion of Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. That fundamentally, a normal person comes to convert, so they're doing so of their own free will, and they have the requisite das, the requisite consciousness and mental capacity to make that decision. A minor is not halachically viewed as a bardas. A minor doesn't have that mental capacity to decide what he wants to do with his life. And therefore, the only way that one can convert a minor is with the notion of zachin, that we're doing something that's meritorious on his behalf. Zachin l'adam shelo b'fanav. So Beth Din can provide that lacking das on behalf of the katan in order to facilitate a gerus. So the question is, what needs to be in place in order to assume that is indeed a zechus for a child to become halachically Jewish? Moshe has the possibility that generation ago some Rabbanim followed. Moshe doesn't endorse it in the printed tshuva. He says it's a possibility that maybe you could argue, this is in Chelak Aleph because Moshe Simon Kufnan Ches, maybe you could argue that if just being a Jew, even if you're not going to be observant, is itself considered a zechus. But the general consensus in the halachic literature, Rav Shechter quotes that this was the Rav's position, but it's a position of most who address this in print, Rav Kook and Das Cohen, Sri Dayesh, many others, that is only really a zechus to be considered Jewish if you're going to be raised to live an observant lifestyle. So the question is there a better than even chance when you're converting this baby, you're converting this 5-year-old, that the environment is such that they're going to grow up to live an observant lifestyle? So generally we assess that as a family living an observant lifestyle. And minimally, are they keeping Shabbos? Are they keeping kosher? Are they going to commit to send a kid to an Orthodox day school? Are they part of an Orthodox community? So if all that's in place, then there's a reasonable, better than even chance that the kid's going to grow up to be from. So generally speaking, we would never convert a child who's living in a normal family union with father and mother, if let's say the father is Jewish and the mother is not Jewish, because that's not a recipe for raising a frum child. If the mother's not Jewish, presumably it's not a frum household. They're not living a properly observant lifestyle. It's not going to be a zechus to make this child Jewish. In this particular situation, Rav Nota says the calculus is different, because here the mother wants to convert Orthodox. The reason she's not is not because of her, it's because of me. I'm not letting her convert. So at the end of the day, the family is going to be living a frum lifestyle. They want to send the kid to the local day school. That's the line that you zeroed in on, that they're prepared to pay yeshiva tuition. And Rav Nota was confident that they're going to raise the kid to be frum. And in that situation, he felt comfortable doing a gerus for this child.
So that's remarkable, right? That's the true amecha ami, that you're willing to shell out the day school tuition. I still get a kick out of that point. I think it's true. I think that's a true sacrifice. But this is interesting because she, in principle, is willing to convert, but Rav Nota's own chumrah or standard that he holds doesn't allow her to. But I could understand why someone who was not privy to this, it raises a red flag when they see, wait, the mother's not Jewish, but the child's converted. There's no way this child's going to be brought up in an observant lifestyle. But kachava, that's what happened apparently.
Right. I would just say an analog to this is a shaila that comes up every now and then, not often, but we've had this a few times over the years, where let's say you have a Kohen who's married to a non-halachic convert. Mm-hmm. Kohen's married to someone who's not halachically Jewish, a non-halachic convert, and then they become more observant and they begin to live a frum lifestyle. So in a normal situation, you convert the wife, but you can't convert the wife because she's a Sirul Kohen.
Mm.
Now, really, they should divorce. But if they're not prepared to divorce and they already have a kid and they're basically living a firm lifestyle, but you can't convert the mother because he's a Kohen, can you convert the kid? So we've had this a few times over the years. There's a tshuva in Marei have a Bazak, the collection of Eretz Kanda tshuvas, and our previous Abbas Gedalia, the Schwarzer Levracha, dealt with this one. So we've had it a couple of times where we felt ideally this couple should separate, but if they're not going to separate, even if we can't be Megayer the mother, maybe you could be Megayer the kid if the family is basically from, aside from the fact that there's a technicality preventing the mother from converting.
Right. There's different variations of this kind of scenario. Now, I'm curious, does it play any role? Of course, yichus for being Jewish, non-Jewish goes through the mother, but I'm curious if the father, let's say the scenario was the father didn't want to convert or wasn't able to convert, would that make things play out any differently, or would it essentially be the same kind of analysis?
Well, typically, if the father is not Jewish and the mother is Jewish, then the kid is probably Jewish. So it could come up, I guess, with an adoption if you have a Jewish father and non-Jewish mother, sorry, a Jewish mother, non-Jewish father, and
Right.
they want to adopt. But it's hard to find the scenario
Right. It's
where
it would be right.
the
That
father.
you'd have to like, play around a little bit to make that work. Okay, so are there other, nafkaminas, anything that emerges from here, anything either from the tshuva, Rav Nota, or anything that's like, like a real takeaway? So for those of us who aren't, day in, day out, dealing with Hilchos Gerus, what's something that you would want us to know about this particular scenario, or any broader lessons for us to draw from it?
So I think what you see from this letter is the balance between Rav Nota's commitment and interest in helping those in need without, as we said, compromising on his halachic principles, and the fact that he was able to struggle to address all angles of a shaila in order to reach what he felt was a proper halachic conclusion with the sensitivity and the interest in doing what he could to help people who needed his help. And that really, I think, characterized his whole life and his service to Klal Yisrael over decades and decades, where he would go to all lengths and travel any distance to help someone who is in need of halachic assistance.
Absolutely. This is great. And I really appreciate you doing this because even though we've done a lot of, I'd say, chuvos on the podcast that are 20th century, oftentimes it'll be the Igros Moshe, it'll be the Tzitz Eliezer, it'll be Ramanasha Klein, it'll be many of the published chuvos. But what I think is really great that you're doing with Rav Nata is making sure that his chuvos are available for all of us and giving us a deeper appreciation of the remarkable work that he did, as well as the remarkable work that you're doing in your capacity as well. So thank you that all you do for the Jewish people, both in terms of Gerus and everything else. And thank you so much for sharing Torah with our listeners today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be your guest and continued hatzlacha on this wonderful platform.
Thank you. You as well.